It's December 27th, 2024. Welcome and Merry Christmas. I'm with Mr. John J. Jeckovich, and we're reading his book, Their Mother's Sons. How are you doing today, Mr. Jeckovich?
No, good.
You're looking well.
Yeah, survived Christmas.
Yeah, you had a beautiful Christmas, and now you got the New Year knocking on your door.
Yeah.
This is, by the way, Mr. Jeckovich's 99th Christmas. 99th Christmas. And today, exactly 80 years ago, Mr. Jeckovich was fighting in the Battle of the Bulge. The Battle of the Bulge, and that started on December 16th.
Mm-hmm.
So he's approximately in the 11th day of the Battle of the Bulge, where it was one of the bloodiest and had most casualties of World War II. The Battle of the Bulge was Hitler's last-ditch effort to create a lot of pain to the American soldiers. It all took place in the Ardennes Forest, where the 101st Division was on rest and relaxation because they thought they were safe being in the Ardennes Forest because it was so thick and heavily wooded, and it would be impossible. The terrain made it impossible for tanks to transport. So the 101st Division thought they're pretty safe. They just came out of many wars. But to their surprise, Hitler devised an attempt to destroy Americans. He sent out 600,000 Nazi soldiers with 6,000 tanks. And basically the 101st Division were in Bastogne. And so it was basically 500, 600, 700 American soldiers against 600,000 Nazis that surrounded Bastogne. But the 101st, they never gave up. The casualties were high, but they knew they had to hold it long enough so the skies to clear, so the Air Force would come in and start bombing some of the 600,000 Nazis that surrounded them, and start bombing some of the Panzer's tanks, which there was 6,000 of them. It didn't give up. The weather was horrible, so it took 2 or 3 days. The weather finally came in, and so now they were able to get a little bit of help. But there's two sides to every coin when you're dealing with air power and friendly fire. What accidentally took place was the American Army and the Air Force thought that all the 101st were completely killed. They thought their communications were poor. In fact, a 12-year-old kid today has better communications with his cell phone than the Army did back in World War II. The communications were poor. So the Air Force thought that because there's 600,000 Nazis surrounding the 101st American Army in Bastogne, that they're all dead. So to add insult to injury, the Air Force, with friendly fire, start bombing Bastogne. I mean, these guys, number one, were there in relaxation because they were in many battles, and they thought this was a safe place to kick back for a couple weeks. And now they lost the majority of their men, and they're out of ammo just about, and now they're getting bombed by their own people. So they got more casualties and more civilians died. That wasn't bad enough. The next day, after the 101st cleaned up the mess and hauled off their dead and hauled off the civilian dead, the United States Air Force did it again, friendly fire.
Yeah.
They bombed for the second time because they didn't think there was no way in hell that the 101st American Army soldiers were alive. But they did. And in fact, during that time, the Nazi commanders sent a note by courier to the head person in charge of the American Army, which was very few of them left, and they said, surrender. And the head of the American Army at the time, he sent a message, said, nuts. Well, they couldn't translate it, they couldn't figure it out. So the high command of the Nazis surrounding Bastogne, sent another messenger and says, "What does nuts mean?" And they basically, American soldiers basically told them to go to hell. It was not in the 101st or any other Army soldier, combat soldier, during World War II, it wasn't in their makeup to ever think of giving up, right?
Yeah.
You just don't surrender.
Yeah.
And during this time, a lot of Americans were killed and shot, and unfortunately, the 45 medics and one nurse and a lot of injuries on the American side were captured by the Nazis. And the Nazis and the SS says, "We don't have time to deal with all this." So the injured soldiers, the nurse, and 45 medics were shot right on the spot. Later this took place and played out in the Nuremberg trials. About 64 high-ranking Nazi officers that did horrible things to the American soldiers. They were all sentenced to death by hanging. And Hitler at that time took the coward's way out and he committed suicide. So now we have it where the 101st is out of ammo just about. Most of the guys are dead. They had no idea that they'd be surrounded. 600, think about it. Think about some of the cities in the United States. 600,000 Nazis with weapons,
Yeah.
and 6,000 tanks. Well, here's how Mr. Jeckovich fits in. Here's how Mr. Jeckovich fits in. He was about 200 or 300 miles away under Patton's control, command, and 4 o'clock in the morning, cold day, it's always 20, 30 below, wind chill factor, oh man, wind chill factor was probably 40 below. It was the coldest winter of record. And so 4 o'clock in the morning, these guys are freezing their asses off, 200 or 300 miles away, and thousands of like cattle cars, cattle trucks, open, not cover, pull up, and they got the instructions at 4 o'clock in the morning, get in these trucks. And they packed them in so tight in the back of these open air trucks, you could not sit, you had to stand, like sardines, stand. And this went on for probably about, 8 or 10 hours, you think?
Yeah.
And now when you got there, there's not the roads like we know of today. These are holes, big nasty dirt roads. After this bouncing ride, freezing cold, no place to sit.
And they don't even have the right clothes.
They don't have the right clothes. Tell us about your clothes.
They had no clothes. They had buckled that I wore to school.
And today you're still suffering from frostbite.
Yeah.
Did you suffer last night?
I suffered last night, yeah.
Yeah. And that's 80 years later. So anyways, they load them up in thousands of these trucks in the back lines, and they go for 8 to 10 hours to get it the closest to Bastogne as possible. And they drop them off after going through all this, woken up 4 in the morning and say, go fight. Just get out and go fight. And so that was a bloody battle there too. So eventually the young American soldiers, all teenagers, pushed the Nazis back. They entered Bastogne. See, if Bastogne would have been taken over by Nazi control, things would have turned out badly for the Americans. But the 101st held it, and to Mr. Jeckovich and his hundreds of thousands of troops showed up. But this battle raged on for
44 days, yeah, 44 days.
This battle raged on for many weeks afterwards. And then finally, after many casualties, Mr. Jeckovich and all the other combat soldiers pushed the Nazis back.
To Germany.
Pushed them back to Germany. And now many of them are surrendering. They're not surrendering by the hundreds, they're surrendering by the thousands. They're surrendering by the thousands. And then at that time, shortly thereafter, Hitler committed suicide, so there was no guidance. There was no guidance. Hitler was simply a sociopath with no empathy. He was on so many damn drugs, he didn't know what the hell he was doing. In fact, during the 10 years he was in power, he was so worried about getting assassinated. Between 4,000 and 6,000 of his so-called own trusted associates and men, he had killed because he thought they were plotting against him. He was certainly having many, many health problems, both physically and mentally. So they pushed him back, and the war was really winding down. That was pretty much to the end. But Berlin, which was a thriving city in 1939, wasn't Berlin so thriving? People shopping and businesses. And Hitler put his 2 cents in, and he destroyed it. That's why we have to be so careful of people like this guy and Putin taking power, because if you don't stop them, you're not going to stop these guys with words. Diplomacy won't work. You have to use physical strength, and if you don't do that, you will lose each and every time. So finally, Mr. Jeckovich and team pushed them all back, and their next dirty task was taking jeeps and bolt cutters and busting the gates down for all the Jews in concentration camps and all the American soldiers. And what did they tell you when you arrived there?
Don't feed them.
And why is that?
Because their system is all screwed up.
Yeah. We can't describe the things that these soldiers seen, but I assure you, every day it rents space in their head. Every single day for 80 years, there's no getting away from it. There's things that these Nazis did to their own citizens, the Jews, and the American combat soldiers were unthinkable. I mean, it's a long list, but what I'm thinking of now is they rounded up about 4,000 twins. They had an obsession of twins. They rounded up 4,000 twins, and out of the 4,000 twins they rounded up over the course of 3 or 4 years, only 200 sets of twins lived. But they did horrible experiments on them, and one of the most common experiments was to sew the 2 twins together. Who could even imagine doing that? Who could even imagine? How sick and perverted could your mind be to even think of something so disgusting? All these medical experiments, or they'd freeze you solid and see, what the results were. Cut off your arms, cut off your legs. It was one horrible thing after another under the guise of medical experimentation. What an absolute sickening joke. So they finally pushed them back, and once they pushed them back and they busted down the gates, they brought in the townspeople in Germany. And the townspeople in Germany, weren't their heads buried in the sand?
Oh, they said, well, we don't know what's going on.
We don't know what's going on. So Mr. Jeckovich and many people walked him through the death camps, and they couldn't believe it.
Yeah.
They couldn't believe it. They couldn't believe what they see, but they had a pretty good idea what was going on.
Remember he was using the bolt cutters to get in?
Yeah, well, we talked about busting down the gates, and the Nazi soldiers that were watching the camps were brutal people. This came very unexpected to them, and just for the fun of it, on a day where the weather's 20 or 30 degrees, and if you still have the strength as a prisoner to stand, if you still have the strength, most of the time when you're down to 60, 70, 80, 90 pounds, you don't even have the strength to stand up. But if you did have the strength and you're wearing basically rags, 20 or 30 degree, the death toll was like 70, 80%. They'd move you into a big field, and for the fun of it, the Nazis would take fire hoses and hose you down to watch how you suffered. This is like one thing after another. One thing after another, and let's hope we never see these horrible, horrible situations again. It was the worst thing that these young soldiers lived through. Most of these American soldiers now in their late 90s, early hundreds, and it's in their mind several times a day, there's no doubt. And the combat soldiers left during World War II. There's only 6,000 left, and we're losing them at a rate of 150 a day. So do the math. Here's the real deal. Look at your TV screen. Ask them a question. You'll get a straight answer. Text Mr. Jeckovich at 407-366-0000. 407-366-0000. Any question you like, any comments, Mr. Jeckovich will read them and answer them. Is your book for sale, Mr. Jeckovich?
No,
That book of Mr. Jeckovich is almost 900 pages. It'll never be for sale. It's completely open to the public to learn about how simple our times were in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. Times were simpler. Mr. Jeckovich was raised in a depression, and you still thought you had a pretty good life, right?
yeah,
Because you didn't know.
yeah.
You were in a depression, like the hardest times going, you didn't know. And then how, after the depression ended, and now we're into the early 50s, how the wife stayed at home to raise the kids, and the wife would pick up the check from the husband on a Friday and buy groceries. You could fill up your refrigerators, you could fill up your cupboards for $30 or $40, right?
Yeah,
It was much simpler times. It was much simpler times. We have today these conveniences of cell phones, laptops, Wi-Fi, and everything else in between. It's supposed to make your life more convenient. It doesn't. The convenience was back then when you don't have someone bugging you every 15 seconds with a phone call.
yeah.
Wasn't life simpler then?
Oh, yeah.
What was the price of gasoline?
Gasoline was 18 cents a gallon.
18 cents on a high day. And ironically, a lot of young people don't know this. When you pulled up in your car for 18 cents, you could fill up your these were big cars back then, you fill up your big four-door sedan, it's like $3 or $4 to fill up the whole thing. And you get full service. Self-service was never thought of. You get full service, and the attendant opens your hood, checks all your fluids, and cleans your windshield.
Tires too.
And tires too.
Yeah,
All that for 18 cents.
yeah.
Yeah. How far have we fallen? Now we're $3 a gallon, and you're standing out yourself like a beggar, pumping your own gas. And then if you need air, you go to this place and put in a bucket, and there's not enough air coming out of that thing to fill up a balloon.
Yeah.
How far have we fallen? How far have we fallen? Yeah. See, so this book is about telling the young people what was life back then, what the life was back then, and what the war was like back then. Because after this generation's gone, you won't hear it. You'll read the stuff in the history book, which will most probably be wrong. When you were in grammar school, did you have an American flag in your classroom?
Yes. It was a civilian class. It was a Catholic class that had a picture of Christ or somebody in there.
But when you're in 3rd or 4th grade, didn't every morning you start the day by saying the Pledge of Allegiance?
Some of them did.
Yeah.
Some of them did.
And this is the reason why these guys have integrity to fight the war. They have integrity. And an interesting fact was, Mr. Jeckovich is knocking on the door of 100. Mr. Jeckovich is knocking on the door of 100. And 2 years ago, you never even knew that he was in the military. Never mentioned it, that he was in the military. You heard a lot of people talk about World War II, but they're primarily rear echelon.
Yeah, yeah.
What does rear echelon do?
Oh, they help the people on the front line to bring material up.
Yeah, but those were the guys who would talk about the war.
Yeah.
But the ones that are actually in freeing the concentration camps, the Jews and the prisoners.
We're in it.
They lived it. They're in it. They never talked about it. So, but these last 2 years we did it. Mr. Jeckovich wrote a book about it, and he's just spreading the good word so people will know what it's all about. So, like I said earlier, you can text him with any questions. This is a real deal. Mr. Jeckovich was not rear echelon. He was frontline combat. He's been beat up, shot, stabbed, bombed, trench foot, frostbite, and he still has shrapnel on his legs. So there you go. How much further could you take it? How much further could you take it? And I believe the only reason why Mr. Jeckovich is sitting here today and he made it through World War II, his mother, Anna Targus Jeckovich, she was a devout Catholic and she prayed for Mr. Jeckovich daily. And Mr. Jekovich's friend, Renee from Paris, was a former nun, and she prayed for Mr. Jeckovich daily. And I believe this is the only reason why he made it out. This is the only reason why he made it out, because most of the people around him were all killed and slaughtered brutally. So there it is. So I'm going to start reading your book, Mr. Jeckovich, but I need your dog tag number.
420965.
And that's the code that gets you in the computer that open it up. Speaking about the Battle of Bulge, it ended up in Berlin, which Berlin was completely destroyed. The Battle of Berlin was the last major battle in Europe in World War II, which is the Battle of the Bulge, between the Soviet Union and Germany. By this time, the Soviet army was about 3 times the size of the Nazi army, and the amount of artillery dedicated to the battery was similarly enormous. The citizens of Berlin knew that the end was near, and the Nazis knew it as well. See, Hitler was fighting on all fronts.
Yeah.
That's why he was mentally disturbed. Russia had millions of more soldiers than him.
Yeah.
Hitler was fighting with everybody. It was a death wish, basically. The citizens of Berlin knew that the end was near, and the Nazis knew it as well. They put children and elderly citizens in the front lines of the battle. They put children and elderly citizens in the front lines of battle, hoping it would dissuade the Soviet army from a wholesale destruction, but it didn't. The Soviet army drove tanks into the city, practically flattening it, and dropped over 2 million shells on Berlin and surrounding areas. Russia lost about 80,000 soldiers in this one battle alone, while about half of the 15,000 Germans were killed during it. It was a decisive Allied victory and marked the end of the German regime. So the Battle of Bulge was the end of it. It was absolutely the end of it. But how foolish to fight with Russia, United States, Europe. It doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
Unless you're a complete psychopath.
Yeah.
It does not make sense. The end was near. And Patton was rushing to personally kill Hitler, and the Russians were rushing to personally kill Hitler, but it didn't work.
Patton wanted to go to the Pacific.
Yeah, but Patton was rushing to kill Hitler personally with his pearl-handled revolver, and the Russians were looking to kill Hitler personally. But Hitler knew what happened to his buddy Mussolini. They caught up with him and hung him up in a parking lot, bare-ass naked, and beat the shit out of him until his death. They hung him upside down in a parking lot, bare-ass naked, and beat the shit out of him until he died. And Hitler was worried about that.
Yeah.
Hitler probably got worse.
Yeah.
So when everything ended in Berlin, Battle of the Bulge, there were still a couple SS snipers that were lurking about. And so Mr. Jeckovich and his other guys are saying, man, we went through all these major wars for 4 years. We don't want to get shot by a rogue sniper.
Yeah.
So weren't you very cautious at that stage? Very cautious of being shot by a sniper.
Yeah.
And then another problem was the young teenage American soldiers, they were worried about now leaving the Battle of the Bulge and being shipped to Pacific.
Yeah.
You were worried about going to the Pacific because they needed manpower there, right?
Yeah, well, they dropped the bomb. They stopped that.
Yeah, but there was one soldier that comes to mind that didn't think like that. He wanted to leave the Battle of Bulge, and he wanted to get right away to the Pacific and fight.
That was Patton.
That was Patton. He has an eagle bigger than the Empire State Building.
Yeah.
And he wanted to get there because he didn't want the other generals to take some credit for something that he could be doing. But that didn't happen. He died of an accident. But he would have loved to went to the Pacific.
Yeah.
He would have loved to went to the Pacific. And they're still putting together Berlin and a lot of those places now. Oh, they look 95% better. But I was looking at some pictures in Berlin just the other day, and some of those 100 and 200-year-old buildings, you can still see 30, 40 bullet holes in them.
Yeah.
The pictures I showed you the other day of bullet holes in buildings in Berlin, did you recognize that, the buildings you fought on?
Well, some of them, yeah, some of them, yeah.
Yeah.
4 minutes, just under 4 minutes, 40 seconds.
So you recognize some of those buildings.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Let me hit up a couple of these pages and I'll talk to you about it. We're at page 707, we're working our way down. And this is Mr. Jeckovich's wedding in the Poconos. I had not seen Delphine, as I thought it would be bad luck for the groom to see the future bride before the actual ceremony. I wonder how she was holding up and what she was thinking. I knew she would do just fine, and like me, could not wait until the entire ordeal was over. You couldn't wait till the wedding was over with her.
Yeah.
And we could be on our way to the Poconos. The priest entered. Was a priest a young priest?
Yeah.
The priest entered for several minutes to see how things were going and to sign all the formal wedding papers. I thought it was just a roast to get the donation.
Oh, yeah, that's what it was. That was, yeah.
So even back then, the Catholic churches hit me up. Hit me up. You can always know a Catholic priest, man. He's always hitting you up. This the way it is. It's not going to change. So where the hell are we? I thought it was just a ruse to get the donation from me, but I took it in the proper perspective and had a pleasant short conversation with him. He apologized for the makeshift arrangement for this ceremony, and it said it would improve considerably in time for our first christening. So the church was in rough shape.
Yeah.
We exchanged several more minutes of pleasantries, and then we departed. Lookie joined me just before the ceremony. So Lookie came in time.
Oh, yeah.
Minutes, well, all right.
Yeah.
But there was not much discussion between us. We just stood there nervously, waiting about for the ceremony to begin.
2.5.
As the organ music commenced and we were ushered out to the front of the altar, it was then I got my first glimpse of Delphine as she walked down in the short aisle with her father in her wedding gown, and she looked angelic, and I could see she was a happy expression on her face. She glanced at me. She looked saintly, and at the briefest moment, I thought of her name, and somehow I sensed that she was watching us from aloft. Okay, there's only a couple minutes left, so I'm going to let you tell us in your words about the wedding that day.
Yeah.
You thought
Tell
of
us
her
about the
name.
wedding,
The wedding?
the actual ceremony itself. How did her father look?
It was hectic, yeah.
How did her father look?
Well, I think my father was dead.
No, how did Delphine's father look?
He was quiet,
How was he
He was a
dressed?
little excited to know what the hell's going on.
How was he dressed?
He was dressed good. Vest on, tie, suit coat.
And then how about Delphine? Explain to her how she looked
That Delphine?
in her wedding dress.
Oh, she looked good. She looked immaculate, yeah. I mean, Delphine was a sweetheart, yeah. But she was a little nervous.
Oh yeah. And so you guys both couldn't wait till the ceremony's over with so
Yeah.
you could get on your way.
Yeah, so we got
And your brother Lookie made it on time.
Just on time, yeah. He just
he
walked
dressed
in
up
when they
nice?
started talking, yeah.
Was he dressed up nice?
Well, he had a suit jacket on. He didn't have a tie on.
How about your brother Steve and Millie? Were they there?
They were there, but they were trying to take over everything. They
Like
tried.
how, at a wedding, how would they take over?
No, they said they're doing this. Then Millie said my father's a priest and all that. They just wanted to get into it.
And they did that on the wedding day.
Yeah,
Minutes?
30 seconds.
They did that on the wedding day.
yeah.
And how was your mother taking it all?
Well, my mother was excited about it, but she was nervous for Delphine and me.
Yeah. And how'd your sister take it, Sally?
That was younger now.
How'd she take it? How was she?
So she thought it was, she thought it was great, a big wedding for my brother and everything, yeah.
All right, we'll pick it up.
Got another one?